In this video, what we're going to cover is why we binge and some tips on how to stop binging for good. This video is going to be split into 4 parts. In the first part, we are going to cover what binging is, scary stats of binge eating, how we were born to eat, how our destructive eating habits develop, why binge eating is natural, and how diets affect our biological makeup. If you haven't met me before, I am Mel. Hello, and I am a destructive eating expert and therapist. I help women all around the world to overcome their destructive eating habits so that they can start enjoying life without any food obsessions. If you're interested in having this rapid therapy to overcome your destructive eating behaviours or rituals that you feel that you're stuck in, you can send me a personal message, or I will link later after this video where you can schedule a 45-minute breakthrough assessment call with me, and we can go deeper into your struggles and let's work out to get you out there fast. So without further ado, why do we binge? Okay, so first of all, there isn't just one answer to binge eating, and the reason why I know this is because I have spent years trying to figure out why I binged in my personal eating disorder history. And if you've not seen me before, I suffered from an eating disorder for over 22 years. And a huge part of my eating disorder was binge eating. So, and having read books and studied eating disorders a lot, one of the first things that I found out with binge eating, and if you're not familiar with that terminology, is basically when you eat more than the norm. So you're overeating way past the capacity your body's supposed to have. So quite often you're feeling very full and comfortable after eating, and so basically you don't have that lid to shut down, once you've eaten and then you've satisfied, you go past that. So 50% of people who have binge eating disorder is from genetics, and this is what many studies have shown. So what does that mean? First of all, genetics. So that means that 50% of people who have binge eating disorder have inherited it from their parents. So that means that their parents had issues with connection to food. But for me, the worrying part is if you are participating in some sort of binge eating, and yes, 50% of you guys out there is inherited it from your parents. If you are a mother or a father who is currently involved in this ritual of binge eating and you have children, just bear in mind that the statistics goes and studies goes that 50% of binge eaters will then genetically pass that to your children. Another thing that I found out about binge eating, and from personal experience and from studying the mind, is also that binge eating is not something that we are born with. So as babies, we knew exactly when we were hungry, and we knew exactly when to stop eating. And any child that you would notice, like when from a very young age, that you give them like food and they would be very picky and choosy, and they would also eat things like cake and just maybe eat 2 mouthfuls and leave it. But that's because we're all naturally born with the ability to detect our hunger and when we are satisfied. So binge eating, in actual fact, is a learned response. When we were growing up, part of the learned response is because a lot of our cultural upbringing uses food as a way to reward or to celebrate fun occasions, and even down to the most simplest things. Like when I was growing up, when the weekend would come, school was finished, what's the first thing we do? So we go out into a family outing, we would go out for a walk, but at the end of the walk is great because exercise is proven to be very beneficial for our health, but we would get to the end of the walk, and then always we would never ever go out on a family outing without visiting a cake shop, without having an ice cream at the end of the day. And so I was looking forward to the family outing, not because of the walk, because I knew there was ice cream at the end of the day. And then it was like, yay, ice cream. But it's not just that, it's like birthdays. What do? We binge on cakes and chocolates and things like that. So every single fun occasion, we've started from a very, very young age to connect joy with all these foods. It's kind of compounded the belief that fun occasions equals cakes, biscuits, and so forth. On top of that, back in our primitive days when food was scarce, when we would find things like really sugary foods, highly fat foods, we would crave for things like this because it was a fundamental part of our human survival. So we are hardwired not to crave for things like processed foods and things like that. Like I said, we're not born to binge. However, we are born, all of us, it doesn't matter who you are, just like a baby, we are born to survive. And part of surviving is breathing, of course, drinking water, of course, and also eating. However, as soon as the needs are not being met, for example, dieting causes a reaction in our brain that we are being starved. And back when we were primitive and foods were scarce, the act of starvation would then kick in the survival instinct to hone in on things that would help us for survival. So when we would come across something very sweet or something very fatty or things that would sustain us for a very long period, when food was scarce, and plus we didn't have like technology like fridges or things like that, we would literally binge for survival. Because the reason why we binge is because we wouldn't know when our next meal would be. Back in the day, when there wasn't an abundance of food, we would do that as a natural reflex. So, however, you and I know we don't live back in the old age anymore. We're not scurrying and foraging for the lack of food now, because if you live in some sort of normal society, you only have to walk a few meters down the road to find like a small supermarket. Yeah, maybe small. You might have to drive an hour maximum if you live in like a remote village, but most of us don't have an issue when it comes to finding food. And plus, see part 2 for the next video, where we'll cover how the food industries play with us, how our brains are behind times, how diets make us crazy, why it's hard to stop binging, how you influence your binge, how binge food reacts in the brain, and why your brain loves binging.